Today's webinar, Optimizing a Global Training Strategy in LKQ Corporation Case Study. I'm Jared Hornsby. I'm here today to help with any general or technical questions that you may have. But before we get started today, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. You can send in those questions at any time. We'll collect them at the end for the Q&A portion at the end of today's presentation. I'd like to now introduce today's speakers, Mark Richards, the Director of Strategic Program Management at LKQ Corporation, and Tammy Rutherford, Managing Director at Rustici Software. Take it away, Tammy and Mark.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having us, Chief Learning Officer. And we're really excited that you all have decided to join us today. So I'm excited to have Mark Richards join me as we talk about how LKQ is optimizing their global training strategy. And we're going to jump right in and give you all a couple more introductions about who we are before we talk a little bit about the agenda for today. So quick introduction on my side. I'm Tammy Rutherford. I'm the Managing Director at Rustici Software. And I joined Rustici back in 2011. And since that time I started work here as the first account manager. So I've spent a lot of time over the past almost 15 years getting to know our customers better, which helps us figure out how to build the right software to solve the problems that come up from our customers when they come to us. So, and in that vein, I want to hand it over to Mark for some introductions, because when I heard this story, I was like, oh, we've got to tell this story together. I'm very excited to be telling this story with Mark. So Mark, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Tammy. So my name is Mark Richards. I'm the Director of Strategic Program Management for LKQ Corporation. What does that mean exactly? It's a jack of all trades, kind of background in business process improvement and e-learning. However, my online training career, if we want to call it that, actually started back in 2018. Before that, it was very much operational and business process improvement. So a lot of our focus on developing our ecosystem and our L&D environment at LKQ has actually had a lean lens and kind of statistic and data-driven improvement analysis structure on it over like the last 7 or 8 years on a global scale. Especially moving into our learning solutions at the time, it actually it allowed us to kind of look at things really subjectively and try and put a supply chain-esque lens on it that could kind of try and position it to be able to be used in a way that isn't necessarily the traditional learning and development viewpoint from it, but actually allowed us to kind of take from it and develop our strategy for our long-term L&D in a way that would just really, it really shifted us from being tactical people to strategic. So I'd like if anyone's willing on this to actually put in the chat whether you guys see your departments, your teams, your HR functions even as more tactical and more doers than being strategic partners to the business, because the way that we've approached it with this lens has been pretty critical for us to shift that from tactical to strategic over the last couple of years. So with that in mind, I'll pass it back over to Tammy.
Awesome. Yeah, so hang on. There we go. We've already sort of dug into this a little bit, but I really love your approach for having that operational or supply chain mindset. I'm not sure that people really have thought about L&D from that perspective before. So I love it when you're able to bring past experience and combine it with current experience and see where things go. So I know we'll be talking a lot more about this type of approach and thinking about ways for that automation to sort of take away the tactical and free up your mind and your time to be a little bit more strategic from a business partnership standpoint. And then we're going to dive a little bit more into the details and the nitty gritty of sort of the learning tech stack or the systems behind the scenes that are enabling you to free up your teams to become more strategic and thinking about ways to handle some of the more common tactical administrative burdens that come with delivering L&D that can bog us down. So we'll be covering these items today. And as Mark mentioned, let us know, are you on the tactical side or the strategic side of things? Where are you in the journey with us right now? And housekeeping, I think Jared mentioned it, but feel free to drop questions in the Q&A section, chat throw out some topics that you want to hear about or some things that are resonating with you along the way. So we'll keep an eye out at the chat and the Q&A section.
I'm enjoying that message from Kimberly Robinson that's just come through, both as a team of one. So hopefully,
yes.
Hopefully some of the things here in regards to like how we handle multi-language content, improve versioning, how we've kind of really utilized some of the tools and resources is actually going to maybe support some of the tactical side of stuff. So it should free up any kind of heavy lifting that comes out of it. And then on top of that, how we utilize analytics and then move it forward as well as a strategic partner. So I think that's a couple of massive takeaways for us in terms of what we're going to cover today.
Yes, we have a lot to dive into. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, Mark and I have introduced ourselves, but a little bit more about our organizations, because I don't know if Rustici or LKQ are actually household names. So just in case you haven't heard of our companies before, and to set the stage a little bit, Rustici Software, we specialize in e-learning standards and helping connect learning technologies together. So if you're not familiar with who we are, we've been doing this for a little while now, since 2002. And we've really grown up and grown our products up around the evolution of the standards. You might be familiar with acronyms like SCORM, XAPI, CMI5, even LTI and AICC. And if you're not, I guarantee you somebody on your team is, or probably works with these standards on a daily basis. So we really kind of partner with learning technology vendors, so the LMSs and authoring tools out in the space, as well as with training companies, content publishers, and even organizations like LKQ and large enterprise customers to help them build and connect their ecosystems together. The products that you might be familiar with that we provide today to the industry, SCORM Cloud. If you've ever tested a bit of SCORM content, most likely you find your way to our software at some point. Rustici Engine, and that's the product that acts as the player that runs under the hood of a lot of the LMSs out in the market today and LXPs. And then Content Controller, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And Content Controller helps customers share and distribute content across single systems or multiple systems. And we'll dive into how LKQ is doing that specifically. But that's a little bit more about us. Mark, tell us more about LKQ.
Yeah, so LKQ are pretty much the world's largest automotive distributor, if we call it that, from both a North America and European perspective. We have a service industry based out of India, and we've got a supply chain function based out of Taiwan as well. We deal with salvage parts from scrap yards. So if a vehicle's in a wreck, we will get it from the insurance company and auction house. We will dismantle it, and then we will... we're pretty green in that aspect. We'll actually sell parts back to the industry through workshops for repair, or we'll take the metals and scrap them down and recycle them accordingly. Or alternatively, we have an aftermarkets piece of each business, which basically focuses on new parts that are aftermarket, not original equipment parts, and a few service-based industries as well, such as anything electronic that's on a car, diagnostics, and so on. In the European market, we're more hard parts, so we're a little bit more mechanical, all the filtration, service parts, electrical pieces, and so on. So we've got two very differing business models out of the North America and European markets. What we're also in is 20 plus countries. I think we're in 25, 26 different countries now with a significant number of locations. We're north of around about 1,400, somewhere in that region. And within that, we've got a very diverse population that's speaking 25, 26 different languages. We cater for 45,000 employees, and we've got job architectures that are very different as well. So if we focus on the ecosystem of LKQ, it's quite significant. Incredibly large business that, as Tammy mentioned, a lot of people have probably not heard of. We kind of run in the background of the whole vehicle repair industry. And if you have heard of us in the European markets, it might be such as Euro Car Parts in the UK, or Riag or Stahlgruber out of Germany and Italy. And then in North America, we're under the LKQ banner, an Elitech banner as well from a services point of view. So that's a little bit about LKQ Corporation as a whole. I'd actually like to just dovetail quickly into what the org chart for our learning ecosystem looks like. And I think this bit here is going to be pretty prevalent. So we're pretty significant in terms of where we were when we started this journey. So if I was to rewind back to 2017 and talk about how our ecosystem looked, we had, as we've grown for acquisitions, we had a number of different learning management solutions. We had a number of different programs that were being used. We had thousands of duplicated versions of courses of the same thing, just built by different companies. We had same thing in different languages. None of it was consolidated. We went on a journey from having just our North America business unit and our UK business unit on our main single learning management software entirely to our entire business unit over like the last 7 years. So we've gone from having 16,000 employees that we cater for to 45,000. If you look at the breakdown of that, it's your classic Pareto of 80-20, right? 80% of our workforce is frontline. It's people that are at the forefront. It's dismantlers. It's warehouse workers, delivery drivers, and so on, compared to the 20% roughly office workers, where we see everything from sales all the way up to our C-suite all be included in that. So very heavy demographic in terms of people who don't necessarily use a computer on the day-to-day on their tasks. So their main focus is getting in, getting out, and getting done what they need to do from a business requirement. And as I mentioned before, we're in 20 plus countries and 25 different languages at least. So quite significant there. And historically, the way that we had this is we had our L&D team. It was branded underneath LKQ University, and we had a pocket in the UK and we had a pocket in North America, and everyone did everything. So Kimberly's comment there did resonate with me, like both as a team of one. And we had instructional designers who were help managing the LMS. We had no real content strategy. We were very reactive to what the business needed. And this is back in 2018. So we've done a lot of work to try and shift away from that. One of the things that we did do back in 2023 was to actually migrate away from our pre-existing single LMS that we had everyone migrated to at that point. And we put them all into Cornerstone. And our rationale behind that was, one, it gives us a clean slate. But two, we're also going to try and rebuild our team hierarchy and structure at the same time. And we are going to put content and our content strategy at the core and the center of all of this. So what that meant is we effectively mirrored the supply chain function for our learning as to what we do with our parts, our products, and everything else. We are going to put our parts and our procurement elements at the middle of this. It means that that becomes the center of our universe. And then we were able to kind of look at the workflows between what content we have, why we have it, how long does it last, and we were able to establish some really clear, coherent policies that then worked with the design team, who are effectively our sales and marketing department, and they help kind of get the things out there and build them accordingly and whatever else. And our systems team, who basically think of that as like IT and the ERPs and everything else, and they're the ones that help facilitate the delivery. So if we think about it, we've got content that acts as our central procurement, purchasing, etc. Systems sits as our delivery mechanism, and design sits as our sales and marketing department. And content controller and Rustici sit at the exact middle of all of this for us, for a number of good reasons, which we'll cover off over the course of the next few slides.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that idea of, content as the product, or as the center of which you've built the entire system, and supply chain. If you think about that supply chain management mindset, thinking about content first versus system potentially is kind of flipping things on its head. So it's exciting to kind of hear this way of approaching things. And I think how you all came to find content controller originally, and you're not the first customer to bump into a place where we call them happy accidents, but the first use case you have is probably not the one that you value the most today. So think back in 2020, you guys, that was where you had at least 6 LMSs or something like that?
Yeah, we were in the middle of migrating and scaling up quite significantly to that whole 45,000 people in the one place. So as you said, Tammy, it was a happy accident. We were actually, a little bit of the background on the story here is we actually came to LTG and Rustici to solve a completely different problem. regarding video hosting for our employees and our people. It just so happened that we were talking about the challenges of managing content within a lot of these learning solutions, whether it's an LMS, an LXP, etc. We were actually just ended up having a venting discussion about it, and one of Tammy's team walked out of the room and came back in with one of Content Controller's specialists and just said, you guys should look at this. And then within 20 minutes, it was a proper light bulb moment for us.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's dive in further then and figure out what those light bulbs are. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, not everybody might be familiar with what Content Controller is, and it's worth spending a few moments to really unpack this with you, because it is a tool that might not be familiar to you in your toolbox today. So when we look at the learning tech stack, we have LMSs and LXPs, as Mark mentioned. Where do learners go to take content, and then you have the places that you build or buy courses, whether it's an authoring tool, or if you go out to the marketplace and buy content. Content Controller sits in the middle of these things. So it acts as a learning content management and distribution tool. So it can be used across many different LMSs, which is how we originally came up with this product back in 2016, 2017, was to solve a problem for publishers first. So content at the forefront, where they were delivering and tracking, they wanted to deliver courses across multiple LMSs. And that presented a few different challenges when you think about how courses back in the day were distributed across LMSs. And so we designed Content Controller to be able to centralize courses in a centralized place. So there's a hub, if you will. It's sort of a hub and spoke model, as you can see here. You store and manage your content in one location, and you share access to those courses as proxy files or links. So rather than hand off course files in whole to each one of your LMSs for administration and delivery, you're actually just giving this little proxy file or link that allows your customer or your internal customer to import and manage that in their LMS, but it points back to this master file. And we'll talk about what the benefits are that show up there, particularly that LKQ and Mark's team have seen. Once you start managing courses as a single file versus many files out in the wild, you start to see a lot of efficiencies and a lot of gains that come with that. When we talk about Content Controller, we have kind of grown up and evolved with the standards. So we always make sure that we're keeping pace with those standards. So Content Controller supports all of the acronyms you see below, all of the flavors of SCORM, as well as XAPI, CMI5, and then AICC, LTI, and LTI, and then we also support media files. So we want to make sure that we give you all of the ways to import in, match pace with the way you want to build and develop courses. And then these shareable files are shareable in multiple standards so that it can keep pace with and match pace with the LMSs you need to distribute to. Every LMS might have a different version of SCORM they support or prefer. And so we want to be able to adapt and allow you to match pace with those LMSs. But not only are we helping from that compatibility standpoint, but as we look at this centralization or this master file, if you will, or course that Content Controller is managing, that gives you the ability to update it in one location. It also allows you to do some really fun things that we'll get into further around handling courses available in multiple versions or equivalents, multiple languages, usually what we see there. And then the power of having centralized content is also that you have a centralized place for all of your learning data and content analytics. And so these are some of the things that LKQ has really been focused on using Content Controller for and solving those problems. But I think first up, versioning was really the 58 steps.
Yeah, I can't stress how much of a challenge this was for us. And I think for anyone using any kind of LMS, a lot of providers, from what I've seen, I've looked at a lot of solutions, haven't really nailed down the versioning side of things. For us, versioning, we purchased a lot of our historical, and I'll focus on the compliance stuff here because this is where you see a lot more change than the static kind of softer skills or whatever else. But for us, versioning was massive. It was a cumbersome over-processed, over-engineered way of trying to solve a problem that didn't need to exist from a lot of companies that we looked at. The rationale behind this was when you reversion something, you actually had to upload not just the new learning object, but then for us, we had to map it back to the original. We had to configure the audience settings on it. We had to go through and set the availability on it. We had to migrate the rosters. We had to change all the assignment information on it to come to the new version because our LMS at the time didn't necessarily do all of that. And the knock-on effect for each of them was quite significant. So it was 58 steps. Now, if you start talking about workplace harassment in the North American market, for example, what that actually meant was every single time there was an update to workplace harassment training, which for us, as we purchased the content from a third party, we were at the mercy of those updates. And great, it kept us aligned. But what it meant is that we almost had one person actively managing and like migrating to these new versions. And that uplift was pretty significant. And if there was a single step that went wrong within it, like it meant that when people were checking the information out on the back end, the analytics, the reporting, etc., it actually created a huge number of tickets for us to say, well, where's the original version? Like, where is the version that I need to take? Like, which one's the one I need to take? How do I make sure that I've got the right reporting? Or Tammy's already done this, or Mark's already done that, and the report hasn't been updated. So the knock-on effect of this was pretty significant, and it did take a lot of steps to do it accurately and to completeness. The reality is, what content controller allowed us to actually do in this whole piece of version control here was to create a single source of truth for content. And as Tammy mentioned, this proxy file actually is what gets put into our LMS. It doesn't matter if we are providing content from a load of external third-party vendors. We will actually just put the proxy file in. Every single piece of our content goes into Content Controller. And the rationale behind that is it means that we don't have to mess around with any reversioning other than literally logging into Content Controller, going to that file and just saying replace and publish, as opposed to having to mess around with the roster migrations, with all the assignment information, the availability, any metadata, like changing the URL, communicating out the new URL, for example. Like all of these happen as part of the pre-existing versioning that happens through the LMS. With Content Controller, that immediately went away for us. So we were able to say, this is version 1 in the LMS. Version 1 in the LMS will always be version 1. However, the reversioning happens outside of it and automatically flows into the LMS. So once we've literally just gone in and said publish, we don't change a single thing from a metadata, from a reporting, from an assignment, from an availability. All of those steps have completely dissipated, and it's freed up that time for our people to actually be working on strategic initiatives as opposed to focusing on doing that heavy lift.
Yeah, I think that's versioning and keeping content updated is something that is maybe lurking out there. I don't know if it's a lot of people don't realize it's a problem until they try to do it, and then they realize how heavy the lift could be. One of the reasons, we've supported versioning with content controllers because we know content gets updated, and sometimes they're just little changes. You just a typo, you've got to fix something. Nobody's perfect. But then there's other times, and especially when you're talking about your compliance and higher stakes content, it is changing, and the regulations are going to change multiple times a year even.
Yeah, and one of the things with that is the nice thing about Content Controller is if we were to pull down a report to say, when did Mark take his California employee harassment training? It would very much be a case of saying, okay, my transcript shows that Mark did this on October 14th, right? 2024. And we can literally just go into Content Controller and say, okay, this was the version that they did. And we can pull that out as a preview link and provide it for any kind of, if there is any legal requirements or whatever, we can see which version they did at any given moment in time as well.
Yeah, having that visibility is just incredible. And when we've built in the versioning, we also know that big changes like that, you have to reset progress for some of this longer standing or longer running content. not every change means you need to start somebody over. And so content controller gives you that flexibility also to say, this is minor, they're halfway through the course, keep them on the old version. We retain that visibility into which version or did they finish, versus, oh no, this is actually, game changing for whatever reason that's important to your business. They have to start over. It won't matter anymore. It's big enough change. Let's get them started on the new version. So you've got flexibility there, just depending on the level of change that we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a massive point as well, Tammy. I actually completely forgotten about that piece of it. It is one where we kind of take it. If it's compliance related, we'll always just, our governance says, just wipe it clear, start them again. But if it's something small like ERP training or whatever, that's a visualization, we'll just keep it in place. And that is the nice thing, that you can kind of have two versions going at the same time for learners, especially if they have gone through like 3 or 4 hours of a long curricular product. And then you don't want to change them and kick them back to the start.
Yeah. Well, and so that just segues nicely into, with versioning. I think if you think about who wins mostly in that category, it's whoever's administering the content in your LMS, whoever had to make those 58 steps. But that downstream effect or impact of that, being able to revisit how you version things or manage updates to content, also impacts learners directly, like in the flow of work. And I started getting to that when you make changes, if you break the link, it can have some pretty long-term effects, knock-on effects, as you call them, particularly for your frontline workers, I think.
Yeah, the whole reversioning piece of it, once we managed to get everything stabilized, it was kind of pivotal for us, because the stabilization of our content actually meant that we weren't spending a lot of time on communications just to say, hey, everyone, and especially across the sheer volume of people that we're talking about, sending a communication out that basically said, hey, here's a new link for your forklift training, right? Or here's a new link for effective listening. We didn't need to send those communications out. If we made updates to the course, whether it's through the subject matter expert or whoever, that would just roll through naturally, and no one would see any change until they actually took the training. It meant that our comms could then focus on specifically, like, if there is substantial training or changes in that training, then great, we can highlight what those changes are, not hoping that people have read their emails and saved the new URL. So that completely went out the window. We then realized that once those URLs were stabilized, and version 1 in the LMS is always going to have the same URL, we kind of had a light bulb moment where we went, whoa, we can use QR codes here now, because that URL is never going to change. And if there is changes to the course, it's not happening in our LMS, right? So we said, let's use QR codes. Let's see if we can use them in the flow of work. And let's see, for example, if we do have a forklift driver, let's put a QR code on the forklift, and then just they go to get in the forklift, QR code, scan it, and now they've got mobile enabled training ready and available for them. So you have that QR code piece that's now available to us, and it's massive. Like, you could do that across sales teams, you could do it for your new hires, you could do it for your onboarding curricula. It basically allowed us to completely stabilize that piece of it. What that also meant as a byproduct is our support tickets that were coming through almost overnight dropped in like tenfold. It was incredible. So people stopped asking us, hey, what's the link to this? What's the new one? Like, what's the most current version? Blah, blah, blah. Everyone was just like, well, that's forklift, and that's always going to be forklift training. Same thing for any soft skills. So we saw a huge reduction in those support tickets, where our team were no longer just answering questions that were, yeah, here's the link, here it is. And we used to have something set up historically, which was our quick start link, or quick start course list, which would basically be all of our core items that we were always asked on. So people had this reference document that they could refer back to from a support perspective. That has completely gone away. We don't need to maintain that. We don't need to worry about it, because everything that is there is working in tandem with what we're expected to. That's then allowed us to free up that time from answering questions to actually looking into the information to say, are our people enjoying what we're putting out there, or is there is there some positive or negative feedback that we need to deal with? And you've seen that in our results over the last few years. Our actual feedback and scoring ratings have gone from 3.5 out of 5 to 4.5 out of 5, just where people aren't firefighting a system. They're not lost in a system, and they can accurately see the woods through the trees.
Yeah, I think there's so much to take away on this one that just kind of blows my mind. And I love we started this with that supply chain mindset. And if you think about, in this moment especially, I'm just imagining when you go to the shelf to pick the product that's not there, or surprise, it's not what you thought it was going to be, which seems like that was happening previously. Correcting that just goes so far to building trust between your team and your employees, the people that you're serving, so you're not wasting their time. And so I imagine that goes a long way to building partnerships across the organization.
Yeah, it was very much about having the right inventory for the right people. And I think this just allowed us to get rid of a lot of the waste that people didn't necessarily need. I mean, it's a classic Netflix thing as well, right? You use paralysis by analysis to some extent. That 8,000 learning objects down to 3,000 was massive for us to start seeing the wood through the trees. And then obviously further refinement can come from this as well.
Yeah, just that reliable, what do I need right now in the flow of work, can go a long way. And speaking of sort of streamlining things, we've talked a lot about versioning and sort of getting the right piece of content in front of the right person at the right time. But you all are also doing this in a multinational, you're serving audiences from all over the world. So you've got to support this type of complexity across like 25 plus languages, I think, something in that category.
Yeah, so we kind of realized in the first iteration when we removed a lot of the courses that we didn't need or were duplicated versions or whatever in the first wave of this, before we even got into kind of how do we map across different languages as well. So if you look at our entire ecosystem of where we have these challenges, I'll come back to the harassment thing. Not only do we have harassment California, we've got harassment California, employee manager, English, Spanish. So you start seeing this tree of like the sheer volume that you have to like lay out there. We basically said, how can we simplify this even further? So once you've broken out the 16 to 18 different versions of just harassment training that we have for North America in English, you then replicate them again through Spanish. And for the Canadian ones as well, you replicate them through French. And suddenly every single course update that you're going through, if we're talking about those 58 steps, we were having to replicate this potentially 36, 37 times just to keep things updated. And then you've got to communicate them and get them out there, right? So all of these challenges really came to its head. And when we looked at content controller, equivalencies really jumped out at us. It meant that what we can do is take one course and one file and put that into our LMS, into Cornerstone, and actually have that fully mapped in content controller. So what content controller allows us to do is actually, if we've got 25 different languages and we have a global course of which we have several of them, Microsoft Excel, for example, we're actually able to consolidate all the Excel packages from English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Danish, Norwegian, you name it, into one package, so that there is always one curriculum that's available or one link that's available to our teams. And that then can get structured into a curriculum. It can get structured into a complex learning structure. And then again, if there are updates like Excel goes from 2025 to 2026 or whatever the next update is, we don't touch anything in the complex curriculums and complex learning structures. We leave it all in place because we know it works, and we do the updates in content controller here. That then will change in the equivalent, which will then change in the LMS as well. So everything is rolling through from a top level point where it creates that single point of truth from a version and from a language point of view that's really allowed you to consolidate these items down. You've then got obviously that's reduced the administrative burden, but then you've got the end user is where the time from the admin point of view is offset. And one of the best things about this is it's really not offset. When you launch any of these files, you get a pop-up here that will read your system language and your browser language effectively. And if you have your content in that language, it's going to by default set that value for that person. So even our employees here, like if I load something and it's in English, French, German, Italian, etc., it will default to English for me, and it will just say continue back through in English. However, if one of my team members is doing it and their primary language for their browser is French, and we have it in French, it will default to French. So realistically, asking the end user to click one extra button, and it is literally one extra button, is offsetting the complete amount, well, it's not offsetting, you've gained all of that time from your administrative burden to stop pointing people to the right place. You're focusing on the reality of what they need to do, and you're giving them a universal solution that is right there for them, that is across our entire global business.
Yeah, I think that, when we built this was definitely one of those features that one of our earliest customers, served an international audience, and language can just, as you've just described, Mark, I mean, it's an exponential problem. So one change just explodes on so many different task levels, from updating to reconfiguring the LMS and doing all of those things. So I think, the big wins here are both for your administrator, for sure, for not having to figure out an assignment pattern based on, 20 different languages for the same title. But yeah, down to that learner level and giving them the choice based on, what they've already told you on their browser settings, or, letting them pick. So I think there's a lot of wins here. And again, it's just really from that streamlining standpoint, it's abstracted away so many manual tasks that typically come with supporting multiple languages. And, it's becoming easier and easier these days to create content in multiple languages, thanks to some of the new AI capabilities out there and others. So this ability to meet your learner where they are, you have the ability and the power to be able to produce content more rapidly to support multiple languages and, localization efforts. And now you've kind of got the other side of that equation of administering the downstream effect of being able to now produce more dynamic content for your learners. So you got, at this point, LKQ, you've sort of solved the versioning problem. You've been able to figure out how to tackle all of these languages and sort of, get the trust in your employees on those QR codes and the accuracy of the courses that they're launching. And then you guys you decide to change LMSs, which you sort of alluded to already. You moved to Cornerstone, I think, back in 2023.
Yeah, so we kind of realized we got our previous LMS to a point where it was pretty stable. There were still some challenges with it, but we were like, how do we move ourselves and position ourselves forward to be able to move into the next phase of what L&D looks like as a journey for us? So back in I'll caveat this, before 2023, we spent about a year and a half looking at different LMSs. So we spent a lot of time with vendors going through, just seeing what they could do. And we had a prerequisite of around about 136 different items that we needed to see. And then we actually graded them accordingly as well, to say, is this no process, a similar process, or a better process, or a worse process? So we went through and kind of graded everything, and we kind of settled on Cornerstone. And one of the things that we didn't actually think about at the time was just how much of an uplift we thought the content would be. The rationale behind that was, our focus was, we can probably just do the core that we need to keep us compliant as a business, and then come up with a marketing scheme for everything else, right? It actually transpired that it was a hell of a lot easier than we thought it was going to be. So it had that knock-on effect where we kind of completely just overcooked our time on it. So our project manager was going like, oh, we're going to need months to move all of this content. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's figure out a plan. And then as soon as we kind of got into it, we realized that because everything was in Content Controller, we could do a bulk export effectively. And because of the fact that we had all the file names in one LMS and all the file names in the other LMS, we were able to literally just map it overnight and just go bam, bam, bam. And our content upload did not take us long at all. So we moved thousands and thousands of courses from one LMS into another, literally within a week, with all metadata updated, and rosters moved and everything else, because we were able to see the file names out of Content Controller, the file names out of our previous LMS, and do that mapping exercise as soon as it went into our new LMS as well. So we didn't need to reversion anything. We didn't need to retrain anyone in terms of telling people where stuff was. The only thing that changed was the URLs, and we were able to put a catalog out there with all the URLs in anyway. So it's something that we were able to do pretty much instantaneously. And as we rebuilt standardized, simplified curricular and complex learning structures, They then also stabilized because we're not changing the content within them. And then it was just a case of refreshing those where there was operational impact and we needed to do that. So it really did remove a lot of the heavy lifting for us. And it was one of those things that we didn't realize until the time, just how simple content controller actually made it. So if anyone is thinking about this, I'm not just saying it like for the sake of it, if anyone is thinking about moving and migrating LMS, one of the things that I would wholly recommend is leveraging content controller to support that. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of individual processes of moving one or two at a time and getting that figured out versus being able to kind of do it en masse. For context of this whole program, we signed a contract in late 2022, kicked off the project in January of 2023, and by May 1st, we had launched it in all of the different countries. So we had gone within 3 months effectively from project kickoff at the end of January to being ready at the end of April. That was effectively our time frame, and we launched a whole new global LMS in 26 languages, 20 plus different countries, all within that 3-month period. So lots of heavy lifting, but honestly, the seamlessness of using content controller to help migrate the content probably aided towards that. So massive.
That's huge. That's huge. Kudos to you and your team. Hopefully you guys got a pizza party or a bonus or something fun that year, because that is a significant achievement. As you talk about migrating, content when you're doing the LMS migrations, it is the stitching together of things and the mapping of things. And there's also this point of compatibility with the new LMS and making sure that the course that you're actually performed one way in the other LMS acts similarly in the new LMS. And even though, the course may be SCORM file from start to finish, it can behave differently. So every LMS might treat SCORM content slightly differently. And I think that's another sort of hidden gem here, is that the ultimate player of your courses is still content controller. So nothing has changed there. So that consistency, there's no more, you save a lot of time on that testing and making sure that behaviors are happening the same way you would expect in the new LMS.
Yeah, I think the only challenge we had on it was literally doing an export out of every single type that you guys can export, and then just testing those different types to see which one behaved the best way.
Yes.
It's nothing that the end user saw. It's entirely on the administrative side of things, and the systemic side. But honestly, that was the only bit that was made difficult.
Well, and as we're talking about the migration, you started to get to this, and this is sort of the last bit we'll talk about here. But ultimately, is compliance happy? Because that's one of the audiences that you serve, and this comes down to reporting and being trustworthy. Is the data trustworthy? Are you confident in what you're reporting on to be able to serve those audiences? And especially when you're talking about an LMS migration, lots of things can break along the way.
Yeah, so we were kind of cognizant of the fact that we were going to lose history and a lot of other things if we didn't migrate them properly. But obviously the mapping was super easy to do because of content controller, but also we had all the history in content controller as well. So we were able to go back and make sure that user in the new LMS, that their history had mapped across accordingly anyway. So everything that was being pushed through there, you get a whole different suite of reports out of your LMS as to what you get out of content controller. Being able to look at something on a course level or a learner level, it's going to show you which version that they did at which certain period of time. So we were able to pull that out from any kind of legislative reason that we might have crop up if there's any suits that come our way. But we were also able to look at stuff from a course perspective as well. So we could, if we put course information or if we put a quiz into a course and we wanted to look at it, we were able to turn around and say, okay, this question isn't being answered correctly or whatever. And we could evaluate the rationale and the reasoning as behind that. It's measurement systems analysis effectively, where we can look at it and say, okay, why did everyone get this question wrong? Is it because the content itself doesn't clarify it? Or is it because we haven't covered the content? Or is it just a really poorly worded question? And one of the things we're trying to do is get this into our feedback loop in order to continuously improve our offering and our products to our customers here. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is there's a lot of people that, especially in our business, that haven't necessarily configured their HR profiles particularly well, or they just kind of oh, this system's in English, so be it. So when they get this item pop up and it says, oh, what language do you want this in? You could actually do some offset analysis here to turn around and say, well, actually, our French language speaking group is bigger, or our German language speaking group is actually bigger than we realize. So it's then allowed us to drill down into another thing, which is going to be translations within localizations. So we have already gone to the point with LKQ where we've got a small Burmese community in a couple of our locations, but we didn't realize that because of the fact that none of it had been configured. It wasn't until we got into a point where like the feedback was negative, the questions were all being answered incorrectly. We were like, what's going on here? And then on this scale, you were able to use that information to drill down and understand that, yes, there's a Burmese community here. Or in Canada, we've got a couple of big Ukrainian populations as well. So you're localizing content for the local market, but if people in the local market still can't take it because they can't read it, this is another avenue to try and understand the rationale and thought process behind any of it. Coupled with that, the ability to actually hand out preview links to people as well to review the content, I think has been massive for us. It's allowed our legal teams to prep stuff in advance and say, yes, we're happy that this is going to be good from a legal compliance point of view or health and safety compliance perspective as well. So it's allowed people to really start engaging with the content that they own. And our business owners are effectively now our partners, where we can look at it and say, here you go, here's what you have, here's the current version of this. They know exactly that link is in place. They can go and review it, and then they can distribute that to their partners around our global business as well to say, this is the one we're going to use, take it in your language. And then when they're happy with it, that's the item that rolls out for us. So it's the analytics really support us in terms of our feedback loop and our future development.
Well, and I love that because you've sort of gone the spectrum here of the tactical. So, is there, something that we have to look at a learner level, kind of at a granular, specific, question that we're trying to answer about this situation, to this more strategic side of things, which is let's look at our library holistically. Let's see what's being used, underused, underutilized. Do we reinvest resources there to make it better? Is it not the right content? Do we need this anymore? Is it relevant? Is it just what's going on? So being able to have that wide, broad view of what's happening with my courses in aggregate, and then being able to even go down to that question and answer level detail to say, oh, everyone's getting question 3 wrong, and they're actually answering this versus that, gives your instructional designers and the others on your team better insight to say, like, this is poorly phrased, it's not addressed in the whatever it is. You get that insight into where do we go pull that thread a little bit further to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, so that's from kind of start to finish, we've talked about updating courses all the way down to what does that mean from a data perspective. And even though you sort of introduced another tool to the learning tech stack, bringing in content controller, it still feels like if you put your supply chain mindset, your hat on, you're still streamlining things even with the introduction of this additional tool.
Yeah, there was the top 4 words there are pretty paramount here for us, right? It's I think, as Kimberly put, there's only one person in your team, right? So one of the things that we were trying to do is how do you generate resource like out of that same grouping? If no one's going to give you extra heads or whatever to deal with it, is there a solution out there that can help support things in the future? So with Content Controller, there was a little bit of hesitancy to be like, oh, there's another login, et cetera, but we actually simplified the solution for it. We kind of made our content strategy team responsible for it. And they were the ones that managed the taxonomy in there, the structure and everything else. And it became that central hub. The way I like to think of it is it becomes our distribution center. So it really does become our, this is everything that we've got. And then what people see in our LMS with the configure, like we're spending less time in terms of what's in the store, and we're focusing more on, do we have the right things in the store? Like we're not focusing on just having everything for everyone. We're not this shop of, whatever you want, come to us, right? We're the shop of trying to focus on what do our dismantlers need? What do our delivery drivers need? What do our C-suite need? Like you name it. Like we're trying to get, like we've really tried to focus in on having Content Controller as our kind of delivery mechanism. And then our vendors become our distribution center. Content Content controller becomes our delivery mechanism, and then our LMS becomes our front of house from a store and sales perspective. So that's what it's allowed us to do, is to shift away from that tactical moving through the, yes, I've got to process these 58 steps, or yeah, I got a new English version, new Spanish version, I've got to reconfigure all of these. It's actually just allowed us to focus on standardizing onboarding, standardizing in the flow of work training, on the job training, and we've really got a platform to help move things forward from a foundational perspective into like the next iteration as we move through it. So,
well, I really appreciate the fact that you all found us, the happy accident that happened in 2020, and sharing the story today, and hearing from you all how content controller is solving problems for you, how it's helped you sort of bring all of your L&D processes forward and scale to match pace and set the pace really for LKQ and the business and where you see L&D going next. We are done with our portion of today. I'll throw this up here. There's a QR code and a link if you want to get access to not only the case study, but the slides that we walked through today. And we've got time now for some questions. And I know a couple have come in since we've been chatting here. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for those.
Excellent. We've got a question here. Do you have advice for an organization whose employees have a unique set of highly necessary skills, but those skills might not include basic computer literacy? How do we refresh people on these basics?
Good question. I mean, the way that I would have approached that is around building a complex structure into a learning solution, whatever that looks like, and then making sure it doesn't ever change. And if it does change, that it's easily done. Because if you get into LMS changes or curriculum changes, it would be complex to keep that updated, especially in the world of AI and stuff like that at the minute. We're seeing content be generated faster than ever. Even internally for us, our content generation has gone through the roof because of generative AI. We've completely flipped that on its head. And once that's in place, it's just can we make it maintainable, but without having maintenance on every other thing that you've got to do. So it's about mitigating that risk. Obviously, I would build it as like a playlist or a curriculum or a sponsored executive training or skill development program. It just entirely depends what those skills are and the best way of doing it. For example, like we're looking at AI literacy at the minute across LKQ, and we're kind of structuring it from a point of view of saying, we can't just put the same thing out for everyone. So we're building it into a tiered leadership perspective. So like leader of self or individual contributors would get why AI is going to be your best partner and co-pilot, as opposed to it's taking over. And then if you're a leader of a team, how do you leverage that? And then if you're a leader of the org, like what the benefits of AI strategy is in terms of keeping your competitive advantage and edge. So they're the sort of things we're looking at, but we want to build them in a way that's structured, because we also know that they're going to change quite significantly as agentic AI comes in and everything else as well. I don't know if that fully answers the question, but it's very much a case of I would build it in a structure and then find out a way of keeping it maintainable without creating so much work. And that's where content controller would really come into its own.
Sure. All right, let's see. Another question here. We have a question from Kimberly asking about the usability of QR codes through remote work teams. And I think this kind of leads into a bigger question. What do you find to be the best way to disseminate information across teams, whether it's different groups that are being targeted or if it's a specific team that's being targeted? How do you find is the best way to communicate throughout these structures?
So I'll answer Kimberly's first and foremost. I think if they're receiving a link in an email, we don't use QR codes in emails. We just give them a hyperlink that says click here, and that does the same job as what the QR code would do. That is how we disseminate between trying to hit our frontline workforce versus our our computer and IT based workforce. We will use like posters to communicate to that workforce. We'll put it up and be like, take this training, or it's your skills month or whatever. We'd put a poster up to be like, take this, and we'd put the QR code on that poster. The communication mechanisms are very different depending on that demographic. So I think it really does depend. The hyperlink is automatically linked. Yes, Kimberly, it's automatically linked to the reversion course. That link doesn't change whether it's a QR code or whether it's a URL. It's static. The version will always be version 1, and it never, ever, ever changes. So from a communication standpoint, you can focus more on developing communications that are impactful as opposed to just being a quick, by the way, we've changed this, right? I think when it comes to those comms, it really is critical understanding who your demographics are and finding out what the best way of doing it, getting those messages out. Even for us, we could turn around and say, well, everyone download this mobile app, right? But we're not going to push a mobile app to everyone that is going to go onto their personal phones. So like even that's not a solution for us. We have to find ways that sit within our workflows to get that message across. And part of what we ask of people in North America, for example, in our operations is they have something called a lean daily management meeting at the start of the day to disseminate any information. So it could be, did you know skill of the month is this? Or there's a if anyone wants to know this training, they will disseminate that information during like a meeting. And if there's anything else on top of that, then we'll push it through kind of centralized comms for our management levels to roll down and push through. So,
gotcha. So specialization depending on where these messages are going and who these are for.
Yeah.
Gotcha. One more question here. Any scenarios possible to launch and track courses outside of an LMS?
I guess you would if you're, I mean, we don't do that from a versioning point of view. We kind of push everything through Content Controller, even our PDFs and everything come through into our LMS on the back end of it. I guess to some extent, and Tammy, you might have to jump in here, is if you were to export it out of Content Controller in a format that is usable outside of a learning management solution, I don't know what scope that looks like for you.
We do have support for that, actually. So Content Controller does have a feature in it called Launcher, which is basically accessing the course from CC outside of the LMS loop. So, you know, today you're sitting in the same flow of work. So you know, if your users are all trained and that's getting through the LMS in whatever way, if it's routed through that QR code or direct, you know, link, great. But we also allow you to bring that content to learners in the flow of work that might be outside of the LMS. So think about in a Slack or a Teams environment, or you have the flexibility there to deliver content outside of a specific LMS session. And it's coming back to that same course. So it can be remediation if you want to just be doing it that way, and just sort of reinforcement type of training, or just meeting those learners where they are if originating from the LMS isn't an option. CC has that launcher capability to give you that flexibility.
Sure. Excellent. And I think that's going to be our time for today. Thank you, Mark and Tammy, and thank you for everyone attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's event, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would really appreciate if you filled that out and provided your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view today's recording. So keep an eye out for that. On behalf on Rustici Software and our presenters, thanks again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, Chief Learning Officer and Mark.